So that
I'd say less so.
Right. So if everything is, if there's no safe way to communicate.
So just show your direction. If you have any slides, you can just.
we haven't picked up any programmers, man. We've picked up a lot of your project managers lately.
That's true. That's true. You guys got a handful of them.
Yeah. This is now
A couple months ago.
I've been talking to Christian and I've been like, hey, go get us some one of those devs now. You know? That's what we really need.
You guys are too far up the road.
No.
How long have you been there?
They've been there as long as I've been there. So
Okay.
probably, it might be, I don't remember, but I've been there a little bit over a year and a half. They've been there the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah, although we might be moving soon, I don't know. I know C7, we have a lease of C7 who owns the whole complex.
Right.
And they've been slowly like just erecting this security fence around our whole place. Without really saying anything.
Pretty soon.
Yeah, and our lease is gonna expire at the end of the year. And like, I wonder if this is a sign, you know,
Right.
that they're trying to take this whole complex over.
Right.
So it might be moving, it might not, I don't know.
I wish it on. Oh, we're there.
Last name?
Yeah. I don't know. I can see his face, but I don't know.
What did he do? Was he a programmer?
Yeah, he did like Perl when I worked there.
Teriyaki was the one closest to me.
No, we do Python and
He must do Python.
yeah, we do have a good
Tyler.
Tyler Peters? I took a couple cells.
I think his first name is Tyler for sure.
There was a Tyler, or for the Tyler,
So.
but he left a little bit while ago to go do mobile apps.
Oh, cool.
He had like a mobile app to get made and like decided that he wanted to make it full time.
That's cool.
Yeah. So are we allowed to give our little stint for our company like
Absolutely.
okay, in 2 years?
Absolutely.
Sponsored.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, 'cause we're still, I mean, everyone's looking for leaves around here.
It's impossible to find. It's like, there's way more tools than there are.
Yeah, we've been going through recruiters lately, and they seem to find a lot of people, but
That's good.
they're not all the greatest.
They're probably going national too, though.
Yeah, that's probably what we gotta do at this point, you
I
know.
get people from like all over the place. I'm like moved to like some weird.
That's like
Hello? Okay. Does that work? Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right, so I am going to give a little talk about QuickMock. I'll introduce it. I just wanted to start off with a little bit about myself. I have to turn off my speakers because I can hear myself in echo. I work at Workfront, which, as Z just said, we rebranded from @task. Really love my job. I don't really use a whole lot of these pieces or these tools at work, but I do use them on the side. This is my preferred, these are my tools of choice. So to give a brief synopsis of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about how testing is important, and then I'm going to talk about how testing is really painful. And then I'm going to talk about how I tried to simplify that process and make it a little less painful using this library called QuickMock, which basically you just write required mocks, then you call QuickMock, and it does all the injection for you, and then you can just get to the business of writing your tests. So testing is important. There's a lot of reasons for that. In order to write effective, performant, and reliable code, you need to have a good testing system that you can rely on so that you can make changes on the fly, run your test suite, and immediately deploy and not be afraid of where your code's going and what's going to happen. And hopefully customers don't yell at us, those kinds of fears that I've had a lot of my jobs. Thankfully at Workfront, we're pretty good about our front-end development, but historically front-end has been neglected. Server-side code gets tested a lot, tested pretty heavily, but then the front end's kind of just a crapshoot, and hopefully it works. But Angular came along and made that a lot easier for us and gave us a system or a way to inject dependencies and do effective testing. In order to do, like I was saying, in order to have a good CI system or a continuous integration system, you need to have good testing so that you can build, test, and deploy in no time at all and not have to do a whole manual regression cycle. And that's what testing gives you. So if you are wanting more motivation on why you should be testing, Joe Eames gave a great talk back in September at this meetup called The Importance of TDD. It's on YouTube on our meetup's YouTube channel. I suggest everyone go back and watch it if you weren't there for that one. He went into a lot of specifics. He went into some details and examples, and then gave a great case of why we should put the time into learning how to test. By raise of hand, how many of you out there are using Angular on a day-to-day basis? Okay, how many of you are writing testing, unit testing for that code that you're writing? Okay, a much smaller raise of hands, and that's what I figured. Angular's pretty cool. Testing Angular is not so much fun. There's no awesome data binding magic in testing that just makes you go, yeah, I want to do this. So I'll go into some of the basics of testing here in a second. So here's an example. This is a service called MyService. It has one method called isAwesome, and it does some stuff and returns a Boolean value if indeed that thing is awesome or not. Can anybody tell me what the dependencies of this are? Service A, B, and C. Thank you. All right, service A, service B, and service C. Okay, and if we want to test my service, which is a simple unit that we can test, what do we need to do with these dependencies? Inject, mock them. Okay, we're going to inject the mocked versions of those dependencies. So why mocks? I'm going to dive into why mocks. So let's first, before we can explain why we need to use mocks, we need to hurry and briefly describe what a mock is. A mock is, I think, best described by looking at these two examples. So on the left, we have the actual implementation of service A, which is one of the dependencies that we're going to have to mock out. And then on the right, we have the mocked version of that service. I didn't encapsulate all the logic in service A. I just gave some basic, that it has a dependency. It does some logic. You can imagine there's a bunch of code in there that does a whole bunch of important stuff. And then in the end, it either returns a valid true object or a valid false object, depending on some condition. Well, the mocked version of that test would have the exact same interface, but return just the bare minimum I need in order to make my code run with that injected mock. It has no dependencies, it has as little object as possible, which helps us to minimize potential bugs in our mock, but still returns the data we need. And I'll explain why we set up our mocks that way. I could give, well, anybody here could probably give a huge long presentation just on what a mock is, how to use it, why we use it. I'm going to try and encapsulate that really fast in a few minutes, but here we go. So here's a diagram depicting my service, which with its isAwesome method, and then the 3 dependencies that it has, and those methods that we're actually going to call within my service. So let's say we write our tests. We inject the actual implementations of these dependencies, like we've always been doing. All the tests are passing, things are great, and we keep running our CI system. And then one day, all of a sudden, we get a fail on the my service test. So we think, oh, a fail, crap, something's broken, which must mean we have a bug, right? There's a bug. There's a bug. Oh no, crap, what do we do? Okay, let's dive into my service and find it, right? Well, because we've used the actual implementations of service A, service B, and service C, we can't guarantee that the bug is indeed within my service. It could be in service A and it's just manifesting itself in my service, or it could be in service B, or it could be in service C. Who knows, right? It's just a big crapshoot. We're just gonna have to start diving through to figure out where the problem was. In theory, service A, service B, and service C are gonna have their own unit tests, and if the bug was in one of those 3, that unit test should have failed as well. But it would be really nice to be able to run each of those unit tests independently of each other and have the bug that is in its code only manifested in that one spot. So in order to fix that, we, instead of injecting actual service A, we instead inject mock service A. And the same for service B and service C. Which allows us, if we have any bugs in any of the other 3 services, we're only ever hitting the mocked versions of those services, so we know that that code is clean and good. So we can guarantee if a bug arises in my service, that's where it originated from. Does anybody have any questions about that synopsis so far? All right. Okay, so the next question is, okay, I kind of get what a mock is. I know I want to use it. But how do I write one? Well, there's a lot of cool tools out there to make mock writing a little easier, depending on which assertion framework you're using, either Jasmine or Mocha, or there's several others out there, JS Mockito or JQMock. There's a bunch of different ones out there. Those tools provide different syntaxes for creating mocks, but they're all basically doing the same thing. In lieu of going into in-depth about how to write mocks, I'm going to direct you guys to this SitePoint article, and I'll post these slides on the YouTube channel and on the meetup afterwards, so you can go to this site and actually, he goes through in depth about how to write specific mocks for specific services in Angular, and it's pretty awesome. Any other questions? A lot of blank faces. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Thumbs up? Okay, all right, awesome. Okay, so now once I've written a mock, assuming we went through tutorials and learned how to write mocks, how do I get them into my test? Well, as we all know, Angular has its own dependency injection. And because it's injecting dependencies for us, it can control what gets into your test, or what gets into your provider and what doesn't. And when I say provider, does everybody know what I mean? A provider is a service or a factory or a filter or a controller, any one of those Angular module level submodules, I guess you could call them. So it gives us this in a unit test, and maybe if any of you, how many of you have written unit tests in Jasmine before? That's pretty much what the Angular team recommends, and that's what all the examples on the Angular API docs show. If you've ever written a unit test, you've probably seen this $provide. And $provide allows you, instead of, so on this line, everybody see my Okay, on this line right here where it says provide dot value service A. So basically what we're saying there is, okay, Angular, when you need to go inject service A, instead of injecting real service A that you already know about, how about you instead provide mock A in its place? So you do that for each of the dependencies. You get provide.value service A in place of mock A, and so on and so forth. I'm also creating spies here. You can see in the first one I created one with sign-on. The second one I created one with Jasmine, and the last one was just vanilla JS. This is just to show that this framework is independent of any specific mocking tools that you want to use. But anyway, we have to go through this kind of boilerplate in order to start writing tests because we have to provide the mocks to Angular. Okay, so that was cool for my service. It was a little bit of a pain. Thankfully, it only had 3 small dependencies that were pretty simplistic. So it only took us like, what, 8 or 9 lines there to provide all the mocks we needed. But what about, now we're going to go write my service 2 or some other service that also has dependencies on either service A or service B or service C or a combination of those. What are our options in order to inject those tests or those mocks into our next test? Well, the possible options are we can write our mocks the ngmock way. And who's familiar with ngmock? The built-in mocking module that Angular gives you. So they provide us with mocks for things like $HTTP, the log service, timeout, interval, things like that. That all comes with ngmock when you include it into your test suite. And what ngmock is doing is it's actually overwriting the actual implementations of all those things that it's mocking. So instead, Angular doesn't know the difference between the real version and the old version. It just grabs what it had latest, which will be the mocked version because you included ngmock as a dependency in your module. That's kind of cool because we didn't have to do any of that boilerplate at all. We just started writing tests and in came those mocks because Angular just grabbed those mocked versions because it doesn't know about the originals anymore. The problem, the con with that is it can be really easy if you're writing out a bunch of mocks as the overwritten ngmock method. It can be really easy to overwrite the provider you're trying to test with the mock version of it, and all of a sudden you're testing the mock itself for your provider instead of the provider. And it can get really hairy to try and keep all that maintained in your configuration setup of how you're injecting stuff or pulling stuff in for your either in Karma or in the Jasmine spec runner or however else you're executing your test suite. So it kind of gets a little hairy. Still thumbs up? Okay, all right. You should see what I see from up here. It's just, all right, okay. So step 2, or option 2, is we can try to fiddle around with the $provide, which I just showed you, and we can copy and paste those mocks from each test to test. We'll struggle around for a while, get really frustrated, and eventually give up. And try not to slit our wrists with all of this boilerplate that I just explained. Moving on, there we go. So the pros are, there's not a lot. It could be worse, it could be a lot worse. We could be like overwriting window dot something and trying to manage all that, but it's not that great. And there's a lot of cons, like I've just been explaining. It's just a lot of copying and pasting. If this interface for a certain service ever changes later, we have to go back into every place that we mocked that service and rewrite it and update it to match the new interface for our actual provider. So the third option, and there may be more, I haven't thought this totally through, but the third option I came up with was write all of our mocks in a separate regular standard Angular module, and then we'll inject them using a service called QuickMock, which is what I wrote. We'll talk about the pros, and I'm sure you'll find lots of cons, because haters gonna hate, right? Okay, so QuickMock to the rescue. Here is the link to GitHub if you guys want to follow along. There's a huge README on there with lots of documentation and explanation, but I'll go through some of the basics here. So writing the mocks, you'll see this is very familiar to you, except for some small minor differences. When you include QuickMock.js into your test suite, either through Karma or however else you're executing your tests, it gives you extra methods on the return value from Angular.module. So you can chain together things like mock service, or as you can see here on the right, there's mock service, mock factory, mock filter, mock controller, mock provider, mock value, mock constant, or even animations if you're mocking out those sorts of things. And this lets Angular know very specifically, like for this first example, this is the mock for service A. So when some provider that I'm trying to test needs service A, go and grab this instead. And then inside of those blocks, just like in any other service, you can declare your mock however you want. Whatever code you write in there will be returned and injected into your test. So you can see again in the first example, I used sign on to create a spy object. In the second example, I used jasmine.createSpyObject, which is another way to create a mock. And in the third example, I just did vanilla.js again. So whatever I write in there, that's going to get returned. The idea is to keep those mocks really simple and clean so that there's no possibility for bugs. Write as little code as possible in order to make your test pass. Okay, so what's happening under the hood? Well, all I did when I wrote those mock service functions is I'm referring to the regular .service call, but I'm prepending each of those declarations with triple underscore, which is just some predefined prefix, so that then when QuickMock goes to inject those things, it can relate the service you're looking for to its mocked version. And you can actually write out mocks this way in this other syntax, but it's kind of a little hairy. And you have to include those 3 underscores before everything you write. So I just wrote some syntactic sugar for it and called these mocked different mock methods. Does that make sense? More thumbs up? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate the thumbs up. Okay, now let's get down and dirty. What's the API? What is this service really going to do for me? Well, this is the same exact way we would start writing and set up our test for my service using QuickMock. So we hold on to one variable called myService, which is returned from a call to QuickMock. QuickMock accepts a config object here, like you can see, which I'll go into in just a second. That's all you have to do, and you can immediately start writing code for your tests. Just like you can see here, myService.isAwesome is the method that myService has. We can call it and expect stuff like we would in any other test. So what's all going on here? The first thing that we provide is the provider name, which is my service in this case. And again, a provider is a service, a factory controller, filter, etc. So we just provide that name to QuickMock. Then we provide the module name, which is the module that contains that provider, so that QuickMock can auto-instantiate that module for you, so you don't have to call module and pass in the name of your module on every test. And then the last thing is an optional thing. If we want to supply mocks to QuickMock, we just pass in an array of all the modules where our mocks reside. Pretty straightforward. 3 things, simple, quick, done. How do I use it? Well, once we do all of this stuff, that simple before each call to get QuickMock instantiated, then we can, then we can just start using it. I'll go into what this $mocks thing is here in a second, but basically we just do those 6 or 7 lines of code up at the top and before each, and we're ready to start writing code. So what is that $mocks thing? As you can see here in this kind of simple example, Angular already knows that we had 3 dependencies for my service, which was service A, service B, and service C. So when those get injected into your test, I grab references to those things in QuickMock and then provide them on the $mocks object on the service. So as you can see here, my service has a $mocks, which I'm saving off in mocks. and then that mocks object has references to service A, service B, and service C, and their applicable methods, and whatever came back through in those mocks. Okay, awesome. Okay, that was a really simple, very, very simple service that we just kind of sort of tested and kind of got set up. Actually, we'd have to write a lot more it statements, but you get the idea. You could go write those yourself. Directives. How many of you love testing directives? Okay. I was just making sure everybody saw that I had my hand up because nobody raised their hand. Directives are notoriously hairy to test. And part of the reason for that is you have to do all of this boilerplate in order to set up your test. And there's slightly different ways you can actually write this code, but this is basically what you have to do. You have to instantiate the module that your directive is in. You have to provide all your mocks like you normally would. But then you have to call inject so that you can get access to root scope and compile. And then you have to save those off in variables in case you ever have to compile your directive again later. Then you have to supply some HTML string that's going to get compiled by angular.element, call Angular's $compile service with that element and any scope that you want it to use. And then call scope.digest because Angular has to know that those things occurred. How many, again, you don't like to write directives, but I've been bitten so many times by forgetting to call scope.digest when I make a change in my test, and Angular just thinks everything's the same, and like, why isn't this working? Anyway, lots of opportunities for error and frustration here in this example. So again, back to QuickMock's simplistic version. We do the same three things where we provide the provider name, the module name, mock modules, which are the modules that contain our mocks, and then we pass in some default HTML. So the object that QuickMock passes back specifically for directives also has a $compile function. That $compile function compiles the HTML string and calls scope.digest for you, so you get all that bundled up in a single function call. One second, I'll get right there. This slide, in fact. So another thing that's passed back is the $element, which gives you access to that JQLite wrapped element or the jQuery version if you've already included that. Angular will use whichever is available. And then it also is passed back a $scope, which you can access here, as in this example, and do scope stuff on it and call digest yourself if you want to just update a scope value and you're good to go. And then you can do, $element has class. It's all the JQLite methods that we come to know and love. So we can write our tests quickly and easily. Thank you for the question, though. Did that answer your question? All right. This is continuing directives. $compile. So here in this first example, we're just calling compile without passing anything into it. And it will default to use this HTML string that we've provided in the config object. But there are times where you want to change some attribute or something on your directive and then recompile it. Well, if you want to just do one-offs, you can actually pass in that HTML string to compile, and it will recompile that new string for you. And then later, if you don't pass in anything, it'll just go default back again to this same config object HTML. So it gives you a lot of flexibility about what I want to compile, when I want to compile it, when I want to do digests and things like that. So you can see here in this first expect statement, we're just expecting the HTML to be empty, the inner HTML of that element, because here we didn't pass in any content to it, and the template doesn't have any content to it either. But when we pass in some content in the center, we can do, in the second compile, we can then expect our element to have some content to it. So that's just to show that that works. Okay, any questions before I go into the live demo? All right, I saw 3 thumbs. I'm going to count it. All right. Let's jump into here. Okay, this is app.js. This is again on GitHub. This is a simple module that I wrote that contains different things that you would want to test. Here is an example of an API service Here's a factory called user form validator. Here's another service. Here's a controller. Here's a directive. Here's a filter. And these actually have like real logic to them and real examples of what you'd want to test. And then over here, I don't know, it's really small. I don't know if you can read it, but over here we have different specs for each of those providers. So on GitHub, you can go through these examples and really see, okay, that example that you showed in your presentation was really small and simple, but what about real crap? Oh, this is the real crap you can actually test. But all I wanted to show simplistically here right at the end was that when I run all these tests, boom, they all passed. And then I'm using IntelliJ or WebStorm here. And you can see simply that each one of those test cases that I've written all passed in their individual pieces. And those are all written with QuickMock. If you're still not bought into how easy QuickMock is and you're still kind of like, I don't know, this is kind of a pain, I don't know if I want to use this, I've also provided examples of not using QuickMock to run those exact same test cases, so you can see how much code you're actually cutting out of your tests by comparing those two suites back and forth. And going back, wrapping up. So I would like some help in contributing. I just this last week at Workfront started writing our first tests with QuickMock, but I think I'm pretty much the only one to ever put it through its tests or to its paces. So I'd really appreciate you guys pulling it down, trying some tests with it, see if you like it. If you run into bugs or have suggestions on how to make it better, please submit issues on the GitHub repo. I'd really appreciate that. Anybody else have any questions? Because I'm done. Like I just said, I actually finished writing this like 3 weeks ago. So it's brand new. It's very much in its infancy. We just started, this week I started using it in our production code to test some of our stuff. And I think we're going to start implementing it more. We're going to do kind of an internal presentation on how to use it and get our devs using it. But no, not to any large degree. So, anybody else? Any questions? All right, then I'll pass the buck to Rich.
Yes. Right here. Good. F. Sweet. Thanks for that, Zach. That was good. Gonna go write tests all night tonight now. Let's see here. Where's my PowerPoint? Oh, there it is. Let's run this thing. How do I start my presentation? Like, mirror my screen. What do I press to do that?
Like your settings.
Okay. Display settings. Okay, perfect. That's what I was looking for. So I was going to present on using Webpack with Angular. Just raise of hands. Does anyone here use Webpack or have familiarity with it? Does anyone here use Browserify? Have any experience with that? Looks like the same people. Is anyone here familiar with CommonJS and Node and use that? Okay, well, a few more hands there. Basically, my little spill is that if you're not using Webpack or Browserify or something, you might want to highly look into it. It's a very useful tool. A little bit about me. I'm Rich Snapp. I work at Needle as a software engineer. Quick spiel on Needle is that we do advocacy chat software for retail online. So like if you go to Reebok or Adidas or Nike or any of those companies and you chat with somebody, we set you up with an advocate, and our chat experience is actually all written in Angular and all that kind of stuff. And we're hiring. If anyone's interested, you can get in touch with me afterwards. Hiring pure JavaScript people, Python people, or if a C dev walked in here, we're hiring C people too. So all those we're interested in. So to start off, CommonJS, for those that aren't familiar with it, is it's a way of including modules into your app. So if you were to do this, I don't know if the script.js module I included is isomorphic, like if it runs in both Node or on the browser. Definitely runs in the browser. But if you were to write a Node app, it would look similar to this, where you specify the name of your module that you're interested in, and it will load it. If it's Node, it will load like the system modules first, then it will look up the modules that you've installed with npm, and then you can also include relative modules, which I didn't list here, but it's this easy to use. You know, as opposed to like going and trying to find a certain package on the internet, including it in the header of your file, or you can use Bower, I guess, but it's a little bit harder to link it to your project, whereas it's pretty simple with npm and CommonJS syntax. So Webpack uses CommonJS syntax, so does Browserify, and if you were to use this script.js, which you might also look into, it's pretty cool, you would use like that. And feel free to ask any questions along the way if you have any questions about what's going on here. Async require, sometimes useful as well. It's not quite as intuitive, I don't think, as CommonJS. If you've used require.js, it might be intuitive to you. There's actually two ways to use an async dependency. I listed them both here. There's the CommonJS way and the AMD way. I don't think the CommonJS way is actually fully spec'd out, but they do have some kind of spec, and the guy that implemented Webpack followed it the best he could, and it looks something like that, where you actually, you'll notice that instead of getting back my result of my require right when I asked for it, I'm getting back, you have a callback function, which is, you know, pretty standard when you're doing anything asynchronously, to provide a callback and for it to call it as soon as all your resources are ready. So this was an example of how you would require something asynchronously in AMD, require.js, or Webpack. So Webpack, this allows us to use these modules in the browser. It's very useful for, especially if you're writing an isomorphic app, one that runs in both the server and into the web, so that you can use the same code base for your application on both sides, server side and client side. This allows us to write modules browser. It supports both CommonJS and AMD. If you're using Browserify, it only supports CommonJS. And one of the reasons that's the case is that Webpack has a bunch of additional features of Browserify. It's kind of like a superset almost of what Browserify does. If you're already using Browserify, you could probably almost plug Webpack into your project as is, a few little tweaks here and there. But it also does things like chunking and splitting your component out into multiple bundles. You know, if you're familiar with Browserify, it generates bundles. Webpack generates bundles and also can create chunks of bundles. And you will use those if you're doing the asynchronous code splitting. So that's why it also supports AMD. It also supports loaders. If you're familiar with Browserify, that's the same thing pretty much as a transform. Why it's bringing in the dependencies, it'll run it through filters or whatever it is you need to do, and can minify, it can and minify and other stuff. That's pretty much it. No, there's a lot of them. I actually provide a list of loaders. There's probably 30 or 40 just listed on that website. And here's an example of using the require syntax in an Angular directive. So I'm just making a simple little directive here called counter, and I am getting my template. Oh, this is an example of something that you could do in Webpack, but you can't do in Browserify. Is doing, at least not in this style, is including things besides JavaScript. So here I'm actually including the template, and it's going to transform it into a string and put it right there, rather than using template URL. Has anyone ever used like packages for caching your templates in Angular? Or do you got one hand, I think. I've used them a lot, and they're usually pretty big of a pain. It's not as simple as this. And so if you're used to using those Angular template cachers, going to this is like clears up all your headaches that you've ever had with one of those. So here's some of the ways that you can use CommonJS with Angular. So if you're writing an AngularJS application, it's very common to take all of your code and concatenate it together into one big bundle, and then having Angular handle all the module resolution. This doesn't replace, like if you're building with Grunt or you're building with Gulp, you can still use Gulp and you can still use Grunt to do all your tasks and stuff. But this step of using Webpack or Browserify would probably replace your concatenation step. You wouldn't be doing it that way anymore. Instead, you would be using these require statements throughout your code, and it will actually go and statically parse all of your code and build a dependency tree on the fly, and then it will bundle your code that way. So your explicit dependencies, or your dependencies, are explicitly listed inside of your code, rather than having a big build step that says grab this glob of files or grab these specific files. It makes refactoring and working with the code a lot simpler, because you can include dependencies by simply just adding a require statement and pointing to a new relative file or a new node module that you want, and you don't have to go modify build scripts in order to change your package, which is very nice. So back to the slide though, here's the ways that we can use CommonJS with Angular. It's not, one of the things I'm not very happy with Angular is just the idea that they decided to make their own module system. It works and it's nice, but there were some already existing ones, and this one, and so you kind of have to do some funniness in order to get Angular to work with CommonJS, since it already has its own modular system. So the 3 ways I'm going to explain to you that I found out, I don't know if somebody else is doing it in different ways, and these are, I've scoured the web for tutorials on how to use CommonJS and Angular together, and these are the ones that I came up with. You can either use require inside of a factory function, a factory function being like when you're doing controller or factory or service on your Angular app. You can use require to include a whole Angular module at once, and or you can use require and just require a JavaScript file that's just plain JS that grabs the app and then extends it on the fly. And I'll show you an example of those right here. Is that big enough? Kind of small, but okay. So what we're looking at here is this is actually all 3 styles. I have them labeled over here, 1, 2, and 3. It's kind of 2 different ways of doing 3. The first one, you'll see like, this is very familiar syntax for declaring a module. I'm making a module called app, and then I'm requiring another file that's going to have a module that's listed as an Angular dependency. If you include the brackets when you're declaring a module and modular and Angular, it means that it's going to look it up by its string value and see any modules that have been registered with it, find it, and include it into your application. So this is kind of a little kludgy way of saying, okay, I actually have a module. It's in another file, module.js. CommonJS syntax with the / in front means it's relative path that it's looking up, and it's not trying to resolve it some other way. So I have down here this / module.js that shows what that file would actually look like, and it would use the CommonJS syntax for declaring a module. Module that exports. It's exporting a new module I'm making. It doesn't have any dependencies, but it might have a bunch of directives, controller services, factories attached to it. And then I'm actually requiring Angular, when you make a module, it exports some kind of object that has a name property on it, which in this case would be module1. So then I'm telling, and then when I do require module at .js.name, that's going to end up being module1, which is going to be a string. But this is the way of making both Angular and Webpack happy, because using the require means that it will find it in the dependency tree that it draws for Webpack, and then using the .name means that Angular will find it in its dependency resolution by string value. So that's one way to do it. It's actually probably the way I prefer to do it, because I like to usually have my stuff bundled up into a file per module as opposed to file per factory or something like that. The second way of doing it here, I got my controller, I have a name for it, and then I'm actually requiring the factory function to make that controller. And when you look at it, my controller.js down here, it's actually exporting a function, which is that's the factory function that you would normally see if you were making a controller. You'll notice it has some fancy little doc syntax here for ng-inject. You actually need that if you are going to be minifying your code. If you're using ng-min or ng-annotate, they usually have common ways they know of looking for these, what do you call it, dependency lists, and minifying it friendly. And it will not find it if you don't have that in there, because this is not a very familiar way that those minifiers are familiar with. So, but that will make it work still. Any questions up to this point of what's going on here? Okay, good. Okay, so that's another way of doing it. You could do that with all of them. You could do it with controller, you do it with factory. The last one I got here is just plain requiring the file. I'm just requiring a JavaScript file. And in that JavaScript file down here, module2, I'm just using the oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, it does require a little bit of knowledge of just how some people are familiar with Browserify. A lot of people, Webpack not as much, but they both use a common pattern of you can either use it as a command line tool, as a node dependency, or some other way I'm probably not remembering now. So you can actually say Webpack my file, my entry point, like index.js, and then an output bundle file, like bundle.js. And it will actually go through and it'll parse the index.js, parse out all the requires, see all the files that are being included with requires, and glob it all together into a big bundle.js, and it will work. So you don't have to concatenate all those files together. It's making a big output file that has all of them together. All of the individual files are wrapped in closures. It's a little more, I think, explicit and a little more safe when you're making a module this way. And I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay, good. Yeah, and the other part of your question, yes, you can do watches that will kind of like a gulp or grunt watch that will actually look at all the files that it found the first time, and if they change, you'll do a rebuild of your script and make the bundle again. So let's see, module 2.js. So this is another way of finding my module in this file. I say, I'll just include this module JavaScript file. I'm not going to do anything with whatever it exports. And in this module tool.js, I'm using the module getter syntax. They have, there's two ways. There's a setter syntax and a getter syntax. If you include the brackets for an array, then it knows that you're declaring a module. If you exclude those, then it knows you're just asking for a module. So in this case, I'm asking for the module app, which is already declared, and then just attaching things to it. So I'm basically just extending an existing module. If I do it that way, which I usually don't, I usually use the second, third one where I'm passing in the app explicitly and then return back a function that takes the app and just attaches things to it. I think it's a little more explicit of what's going on that way. And for this demo, I'll probably be using this third way, though, of extending the app for asynchronous loading. So let's go. Any more questions on this slide? Okay. So I kind of want to show you guys a little demo of something that you would think would work pretty easily. So here I have an app. There's nothing really special about it. This, I mean, it has require stuff, but it's basically just using a router, and I am making a simple little application that looks like this. Actually, I probably got to run it again, though. Let me make sure that all my code's running. Oh, that's running. That's running. I have a simple little Express server that's just serving static assets and then routing anything it can't find to the root URL so that I can make a HTML5 mode routable app. Looks like this. Nice lime green, matches the tire to the chairs in here. Let's see. And then it just does this. There's a route here, default stuff. Are people here familiar with UI router? Raise the hands. Okay, good. That's what I like to see, because the stuff I'm going to show you is not going to actually work with the default router, and I can explain why in a little bit. But this is UI router. It's just loading this little thing here. It looks like this. I'm using something you might not be familiar with, the template provider. It's basically like using the template tag or the template property on a state, except for instead of returning the actual template, I'm returning a promise that's going to return the template or resolve the template as soon as it has it. But you'll see here that something's not quite working how you might expect. So this template provider thing is going to be called as soon as that state is resolved. And I'm attaching a directive to the app here, which means it's going to actually happen not when the code first runs. It's going to happen later on, because this template provider is not going to happen until I click on this child1 route. And then it's returning that a template with that directive. And so child1 stuff, counter start 1. So child1 stuff, but my directives, poor thing's gone. Didn't work. Anyone have any clue why that didn't work? Well, the reason it didn't work is because this app directive is being declared after the app's already been bootstrapped. You can either bootstrap the app manually or you can bootstrap it using ng-app. I'm bootstrapping it manually. It's kind of the mode I usually work these days. And I'm bootstrapping it here, which happens, and then as soon as I change the route, this code runs. My app's already been bootstrapped, and it's not going to be aware of any directives I declare after that point. So that's what causes the big headache as far as making a lazily loaded Angular app, because part of what we want to do is not include all of our stuff up front, but we want to include it as soon as the route changes. We want to load some stuff and maybe have some more directives, maybe have some more controllers that come up. So that doesn't work, and I just kind of wanted to show that to you guys. So how do we solve that problem? Back to my PowerPoint. So this is, I've kind of scoured the web trying to find what people are doing as far as lazily loading applications. And this is going to be the common pattern. They don't do it exactly like this, but the idea is that in my application, I have my config function. So this is going to run as soon as I'm bootstrapped. I'm getting injected all of the providers that I need. You can use any of those providers anytime you want to dynamically register something in your application. And in this case, I've seen people like make a new register function and attach the providers to all of those. In this case, I'm just overriding the controller service factory value. I'm overriding all of those helper methods that were on the application with a new factory function that uses the providers and then returns this, so you can chain it just the same. And that way I'm registering these things dynamically after the app has already been bootstrapped. And so let's take a look at that. Actually, I think if I go to the next slide. Yes, let's see some demos, lazy Angular demo. So I already showed you guys the synchronous version. This thing's loading this thing's loading everything in synchronous time. There's no deferred loading. This thing doesn't even work. So let me check out my other branch. Git checkout or tag, I suppose. Okay. Now I'm using a module I wrote that I uploaded to NPM just before I came here today. So don't use it. I just not tried or tested or anything. But I call it lazy Angular. And one of the ways I just kind of like to use it, using that third method I showed you guys of extending the application after it's existed. Let me open up the code for this real quick. Lazy Angular. So this looks familiar to what you guys just saw. It's it's extending the application that they defined. Well, let me just go through line by line real quick. It's making sure they have a UI router because that's all they work with. It's adding a config block, which is going to extend the app with all the helpers thing. And then I also added a helper for doing the routing, which we might use, I don't know. And that's basically all it's doing. So then here, I require my lazy Angular module. And then I have instead of using angular.module, I'm using my lazy Angular module, which is a wrapper around Angular module. Declaring an app, passing in UI router, and getting a reference to my new application. And, oh, you know, so I kind of wanted to show you guys something before I did that. Let's go back to my sync version. So just the fact, or the method of going right here and saying require lazy Angular should make this code work now. Because this app.directive now that it's referencing is going to be the post-instantiated application that has my new helper methods that I overwrote. So let's see, that works. Oh, it works. So I got my little counter directive now, and it dynamically loaded it into the page, and it was just by overriding those methods. And I kind of prefer that method just because then you can really declare your application's dependencies synchronously or asynchronously, and it doesn't matter because it's using the same API. Yeah. That would be a hope. It might not make it quicker, but it's going to make your initial page loads bundle smaller. It's going to just kind of an initial, it's probably just going to have your default route in the main bundle. And then all of the other routes can all have their own bundles and asynchronously loaded when they click the button to actually go to that route. So that you can basically have a monolithic app if you want that has all kinds of different things on each different page, but none of them are loading that big upfront bundle. So that's the benefit there. And then the reason I don't actually have this in production, I use Browserify and Webpack in production, but I am working on refactoring our SaaS application right now because it's gotten pretty slow with like 10 different devs just working on it and constantly adding stuff into this main bundle. Our upfront load time for our application has become pretty slow. So this is probably the route I'm going to go for fixing it to make it load quicker. Okay, so let's go back to async. Oh, I made changes. Okay, now you'll notice one thing that's a little different. I have my regular, okay, well, let me explain this. I'm using this route. This route is really just a wrapper around attaching things to the state provider's state. And I provided it so that you can either use app.route and just attach things as a normal state as you would with UI router. That API is the exact same. Or you can also do .route, pass it in the name, the configuration object, and then this kind of asynchronous function that what it will do is it will set up a promise for you behind the scenes. And as soon as it's loaded and you're done loading whatever you want to do with Webpack or any other asynchronous library, really, that you can just say, okay, I'm done, call this, and pass in the template I loaded. And it will set up the promise in the template provider for you so that you don't have to do that. So now we can see this one running. Let's take a check at this. I'll tell you why it got bigger later too. It's pretty cool. So it's working. One of the things you'll notice if you look at the network, I loading Angular, loading my bundle of junk, which is what Webpack generated, and I'm loading Angular router. And here and when I click on this child one link, there's the second bundle. So it just loaded a chunk. If we look at it, you can see it actually has my counter directive in it and some other stuff that I will show you. It has my styles in it, which I was going to show you, which is why it loaded these styles and everything changed. So let me show you guys how that worked. Right here, this is the AMD syntax for requiring asynchronously. I loaded my template. I loaded just a JavaScript file that is down here. And in this child1.js that I loaded, I'm actually using lazy Angular. I'm using the getter syntax to grab the app that I already made, attaching my counter directive. I'm attaching some styles that I'm loading, and I'm actually attaching it to the controller that the template that I loaded has, and attaching it to some of its lifestyle or life cycle calls, so that when it loads the controller, it will attach those styles to the head of the document, and when that controller is destroyed, it will remove them. So it allows you to not only package JavaScript files that like controllers and directives and all that kind of junk, it also allows you to bundle all of your styles and load route-specific styles. And let me show you briefly. Let me make sure I just don't have a slide that doesn't explain it. If it doesn't, then I'll explain it. Code splitting. Okay, so let's talk about the code splitting real quick, what just happened. So how did it split in those two bundles? Let's look at my slides. So the code splitting, those two bundles happened automatically when Webpack noticed that I had an asynchronous require. It automatically split it out into a new chunk and then handled all the JSON on P that's going to happen to load that chunk. And it knew all that just because I used that style of loading a dependency with require. You most commonly would implement these asynchronous requires at the client-side router, but it can really happen anywhere that an asynchronous action happens. You could do it with event handlers, like somebody clicks a link or some other crazy event, or during the directive lifecycle. So when a directive is loaded and compiled, you could have it grab stuff then, and as soon as it's destroyed, you could have it remove the stuff then, or whatever you want to do. You can also split code into chunks by specifying multiple entry points. Probably doing a bit of a disservice here by not showing you my Webpack config. This is actually the config file for Webpack that I'm using, where I didn't specify any entry points. Sorry, if I look at here, that build script I'm running, just running it from the command line. Here's the entry point, and then it's watching it. And then in here, I specified that you're generating bundle.js, but I could also specify multiple entry points if I wanted to, say, kind of have more control over which pages get which starting bundle, or I can just use asynchronous requires and have Webpack split it up for me. And back to here. You can specify multiple entry points, and the chunks can actually be optimized with additional Webpack plugins. There's various plugins like the Commons plugin, the deduping plugin, and various ones that can go look through all the dependencies it found, figure out where your split points are, and kind of optimize it so it's loading the right chunks at the right point, so that it's not like the dedupe one will get rid of duplicate modules that it was using in different chunks, or the Commons one, like you split out your vendor code into its own chunk that's uploaded and can be cached, and you know it's going to be on every page anyways, like jQuery or Angular or something like that. And so you probably have to go look through all those. There's actually quite a few plugins. And that is basically it. So that was how to make an asynchronous thing. I didn't get to go in a whole lot of detail on the styles thing, but I mean, if I show you it here, it's kind of cool. Here's the index. Here's the head of my page. And you can actually see as I'm including that controller, it's attaching the styles for that big font size to the head and then removing it. And I'm just doing that by using a Webpack loader and this one, the style usable loader. And then in my controller, I'm saying, okay, require this style. It's less file, so it's actually compiling it from less into CSS as well at the same time. And then in my controller, I say style use it, on destroyer of the scope, unuse it. Uses reference counting to keep track of how many times you called use or unuse. So it doesn't include it multiple times on the head if you've used it like 20 times. But as soon as you've unused it 20 times, it'll remove it from the head. So it's pretty smart about that kind of stuff. And it's pretty awesome. And I'm a big fan. Some other mentions here is just while looking for some asynchronous loading techniques, is I saw this OC lazy load module. I don't know, has anyone here used that? Okay, I saw one hand, maybe two. It looked kind of cool. It follows a different paradigm, I think, than Webpack, so I didn't look a whole lot into it. That video is a good introduction into getting used with Webpack. And in that video, well, in this video afterward, actually references that GitHub to get information, and this video is a presentation by the lead dev at Instagram and how they set up their whole Instagram.com runs using Webpack and all this kind of fancy stuff. So I think it's a little easier for them though, since they're using React, and React is already pretty much wrapped in CommonJS modules, as well as I think the React components have a lot more lifecycle hooks than you're going to find with a directive and stuff. But I'm not a React expert, so I'm not sure. But that's it. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. 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 So the key there was that the second time I did it, I was using this lazy Angular thing I wrote that did this part that I showed you on that slide, where it actually extended the directive method. It is. That's not what directive normally does. Directive isn't normally a pass-through to the compile provider. That's a way that you can dynamically attach things to that, so that Angular is aware of them. But by default, it's actually doing all kinds of other junk in there. And if you're smart, which I'm not always, you might want to put an old reference to the directive function in case you ever need it again. I don't know why you would, but I overrode it. So, any other questions? Yeah. You mean like you're talking about these loaders? You don't have to do it this way. This is my preferred method. The actual default way is by specifying the transformers in the require statement. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, you might, and that sounds like something where you might want to, if you're still using gulp or grunt, build it into that task so that it can build itself into a way that Webpack can use it. So that might be the case there, yeah. If I'm understanding your question correctly, I don't think so. But usually, you have to use them in a way that Webpack is familiar with, or that one of its loaders is familiar with. But you can also build custom loaders too. Like if you need to run some kind of build script that transforms it in a certain way before it's actually usable by Webpack, you could make a loader, and it's really simple. I made one that just went through and translated some strings and stuff, but you can do a lot more complex stuff than that. So that might be the solution there, if I'm understanding correctly, but yeah. Yeah, especially if it's third party, I would imagine it'd already be built. Like I noticed, I look at Matt library. He wrote Axios, and if you look at his dist folder, it's built into out a bunch of different module formats already that are already reusable or usable in their current state. And then yeah, I mean, you can specify though per file transforms, like using the in the require syntax with the little bang sign that's separating them, right? Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend that. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Show my what? Okay. No, I'm not showing you my bundle. Okay. It looks like it looks like this. So, and this is going to be very similar if you're looking at a Browserify bundle too. There's basically like a Webpack runtime that goes at the top, which includes all of the. This one's actually a little more complex too, since it's split and it's doing some code splitting stuff and JSON P loading. It's usually pretty small. It's only like maybe 20, 30 lines. But so that part was all part of the Webpack runtime, and then it has these closures that it wraps and actually passes in the module that exports and transformed Webpack require function that it translated all of yours into. And this is actually my code. And then you can see it numbers them. It's like, hey, this is one of your modules, 2, 3, and they're all kind of concatenated together, but not really, because they're all closure wrapped, which is nice. Is that good? Yeah. Not always. You can. I do that on our, for instance, at Needle at our application. It's still using Browserify actually, but I do bundle Angular into the actual package. Shimming Angular because of its global export. Is that what you're asking? For me, I actually took the version of Angular we were using and I rewrote it in a common JS friendly way. And it was kind of a pain. But I did that specifically. We have a unique instance at Needle where we're injecting our chat client into other people's pages that might already have Angular, might already have all kinds of other crap. So I wrote a CommonJS version of Angular, and I use that in my bundle, and that way it can run next to other Angulars and everything else. Yeah, I built my own version of Angular. I don't have it export to the global window. Instead, I have it use module export wherever it can and kind of stuff. And I can put that version up somewhere. I think there's some other people that do that, but they kind of fell behind, so I just did my own. Yeah, it's nice though, because then there's no global Angular exposed. You know, people can't poke around at your internals very easily because it's all closure wrapped. So it's nice. Okay. Thank you. Oh, took the mic with me.
I'll be real quick. So I'm going to give away a one-year membership to Front-End Masters. So I hope you RSVP'd if you're here. That's what I'm going off of. Oh no. Crap. Does anyone have Wi-Fi?
I do.
Yeah, can I use your computer real quick? That's okay. And then, so let's bring up the meetup page for tonight. And then also there's a, so next month is NGConf. If you're not able to get a ticket, like most people, there's an extended event. Let's see if I have the info here. It's going to be in Salt Lake. It's $30, and it'll include a t-shirt and lunch both days. I have a link. I'll send that out. But anyway, that's an option. If you want to go to NGConf, you couldn't get a ticket, there'll be like a NG Extended or whatever they're calling it. I'll put the link on the meetup tonight. That's not yet. All right. Tanner, Lindsley. I couldn't see. There's a monitor in the way. Come talk to me afterwards. I'll get you hooked up with that. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming out. See you guys next month.